Let's go for a walk. My next guest is Billy Starr. Billy is the founder and executive director of the Pan Mass Challenge, which has raised over $900 million for cancer research and treatment and is the largest athletic fundraising event in the country. In 2022, the PMC raised $69 million. Billy started the PMC over 40 years ago, operated it out of his father's house for 17 years, and has been running it ever since. In our conversation, we talk about the founding story of the PMC and the journey since, how Billy's personal life was impacted by cancer, Billy's personal journey, and how the PMC impacts Dana-Farber in cancer research. Without further ado, let's go for a walk with Billy Starr. Billy, can you tell me the story behind founding the PMC?
So, I can't say I graduated college with any idea like this in my head, but my life was about to be dramatically impacted by the fact that in rapid order, between the ages of like 22 and 25, my uncle, my mother, and my cousin all died of cancer. And particularly in the case of my mother, it changed my life radically. My mother had been a volunteer her whole life. And I think, I went to college in a period of time without sounding corny in the way I was brought up, where I was sort of allowed to develop at my own pace. But I really did believe I was supposed to make some meaningful contribution in my life. My mother had volunteered with disabled veterans her whole life. So that made a real impression on my brother and myself. But basically, between my mother's dying and then a 1 or 2 month hike on the Appalachian Trail, and then discovering a bicycle, I sort of came up with this idea of a cross-state ride. And I had sort of done it not as a business plan, but I had 2 previous times gotten up at 4 a.m. from my father's home in Newton and biked 120 miles to Provincetown to catch the 3:30 ferry home. And this is the mid-late 70s. And the Cape wasn't what it is now. And ironically, I could say to you, I didn't know the Cape that well. I was a White Mountain kid. I went to a camp there. But I thought there was something between the bike and the landscape and the unique geography of Massachusetts. That you could do a cross-state ride, end up in Provincetown, and the entire cross-state was 302 miles from Williamstown to Provincetown, and end up a 2 or 3 hour boat ride home to a major city like Boston. That was pretty cool. When I first came up with the idea, I wanted to do it by myself. I wasn't thinking of a business. I wasn't thinking of how to raise the most amount of money. I was probably wanting to purge my pain about my loss, how our family dynamic had so radically changed after my mother died. And so I go into the Jimmy Fund in April of 1980. And I meet this wonderful woman named Joanne Goldberg, who was a volunteer. And I believe she herself later died of cancer. And with the friends of Dana-Farber. And they sort of like pivoted me to her, like, here's this kid, he's 29 years old, he's got an idea, good luck. And she said to me, so what's your goal? I said, my goal is to raise money to fund cancer research. And she looked at me and said, so you think you're better off doing that by yourself? I hear him go, shit, she's right. I got to become an event coordinator. I got to get people to do this with me. And so this journey began. I could tell you for those first 5 years, in 1980, the first year only, the PMC rode from Springfield, Provincetown, 220 miles. And day one was 140 miles, very tough route, finishing with 10 miles. It's like putting Heartbreak Hill in the final 10 miles of the Boston Marathon. And, at the end of the weekend, everybody got lost. We ran out of food, and the ferry broke down. We had to take buses home. And I was humorously and unceremoniously thrown into the harbor by the riders, where we met at the dock. We didn't even have an official finish line. And we get on the bus, and I had no plan for 1981. But on the bus, I could hear what people were saying. Next year, and I could help with this. And I realized in that moment that this meant something to people. And that in your life, so to speak, there is work and there is family. But if you kind of have your act together, there's this third component. And whether we would now call it volunteerism, community, philanthropy, giving back, that made people feel good about themselves. That night, I shared that sentiment with my girlfriend at the time. And she looked at me and she said, look, it was nice, but grow up. Now, if you knew the relationship, you can guess where that went. And I said, I'll show you. I'm going to make this thing big. So there's negative reinforcement for you. But it turned me on. That's the truth of it. And, looking back, I could probably say to you, it was 10 years before I could see in myself that I had the skills to do this. I was a good communicator. I was a good athlete. I had a good ear for picking up who was willing to help with whatever. And, it was such a high performance. And, I just said, this is it. I'm going to make this thing big. And I guess, without going through 44 years, I was very good at communicating to my constituency, who over time were fundraising cyclists and volunteers. The last component was the corporate underwriting. But, when we grew from $10,000 to $40,000, that was 400% growth. And, as you know, last year we presented a check for $69 million. Nobody could see that coming. Nobody could see, and not myself. I'm not a techie like you. The web changed my world. What happened, the PMC preceded Le Mans, Armstrong, Tour de France consciousness in the United States, biking becoming the new golf, and the web. When the web hits in 97, at this point, I'm like still going to the airport, the post office. I'm still going to the post office in June or July, hoping that somebody's going to register for my event. And now, we open registration in January, and in 2 weeks, you get 4,000 people registered. That was a game changer. So many things I could share, but this confluence of the bike, this absolute genesis of the a-thon industry, which is now likely a $5 billion industry. You can run, walk, swim, bike for every good cause under the sun. But there's nothing like the PMC. We're probably, we're bigger than the next 8 bike-a-thons put together. The next 8 largest. Max, hang on. And if the expenses were known on the national organizations, lung cancer, we're probably bigger than them. They're grossing 100, 150 million, but I guarantee their expenses are 30, 40 cents on the dollar. They just don't print it. Whereas the PMC, friends, when we say we give them $69 million, that's what we gave. Not what we raised. We raised and gave. As we are now in the 17th consecutive year of 100% pass-through. So what does that mean? What that means is that I have my year-round operation and fixed expenses covered by sponsorship, registration fees, merchandising, and interest on the money over the course of like a year as we turn the money over every single year. Our retained assets are, our equity's like less than $2 million. So every year, we're starting all over again. So that becomes a pretty high mountain to climb. And primarily, though, we now have 3 other programs, as we wanted to give anybody who children are kids ride program, the gravel segment with unpaved, and the indoor cycling world with our winter cycle at Fenway Park. All that being said, and people matriculate through these programs, but the PMC weekend is like 98% of our year-round revenue. And what has happened as I built this model, which is to say, I'm not necessarily proud of this, but it's true. I worked alone for 10 years. I worked for 17 years out of my father's house. I was very good at getting in-kind donation, which now totals over $5 million a year. So you talk about in-kind, you talk about oranges, trucks, things that if you don't get donated, you're going to have to pay for it. In 1990 was the first year. Go right ahead. We had passed through. Hello. 90 cents on the dollar. And I started promoting it. And you can see how much it resonated with people. And now it's been studied in 2 successive studies over the last 7 years by the Parthenon Group. And one of the most interesting facets of what we found from the study was that the 100% pass-through means more to the riders than raising money for cancer research and treatment at Dana-Farber. It's like this holy grail that they feel good about, not just good about themselves, because believe me, in the world of nonprofit and, appropriate, if you're doing 70 cents on the dollar, they're all legit. If you're doing 85 cents on the dollar, you're like A-level. So 100% is rare. That's not necessarily how it, would show in a 990 report, because you got to report all that sponsorship, all that in-kind as a line item. But what it's doing is offsetting, so that in my world, there is the year-round expense, there's the in-kind, there's the professional volunteerism, which we can't account a penny. That's worth millions of dollars. And then there's the rider-raised revenue. So I've got the fixed expenses and offset by the things that's just so that when you give me $100, that's going right to the annual gift. It's not rocket science, but neither is it easy to do. So that model got built. So even today, we are 13 full-time people with a professional 13 head staff. These are professional volunteers that average over 20 years with me, who are managing not just the hub sites, the road coordinator, the communications, the medical, the mechanical, the massage. And beneath them are, 3,000 to 4,000 volunteers per year, controlled through our office. But, running an $80 million business with 13 people is probably virtually unheard of. And, we hope to be able to maintain that. The technology factor is, increasingly a big deal. We're probably soon to hire our second tech person full-time. We need it for so many aspects of it. But without, making this boring, going into the weeds of running a business and the whole administration thing. But here's an interesting stat. We'll probably do over 300,000 individual gifts that will make up this year's gift. The Dana-Farber Cancer Institute does about 140,000 gifts a year, albeit they get larger $1 million, $10 million gifts. Nothing wrong with that. But the whole country's gotten behind the PMC. So, flash forward again 44 years, and here we be. And you got riders each year from like 46 states and 15 different countries. It's a big deal.
Absolutely.
So, I was trying to build something where, someday you could say, in the consciousness of, if you've got cancer in your life, if you've got a bike in your life, and you want a world-class cycling, spiritual, emotional experience, got a bike, got to come to Boston, ride the PMC. And, we're getting there on that, like the Boston Marathon, or like the Iditarod, or the Hawaiian Ironman, these iconic events that have many special ingredients to them, whether the first, the biggest, the toughest. But, in terms of, I've been riding my event for 45 years, and it's a gorgeous route. I should tell your audience now the infrastructure of the PMC. So the PMC is 16 different routes, 47 towns, a total of 370 miles of infrastructure. To which I say to some people, the Boston Marathon is a nice little event. 26 miles, one route, boom. This is a major military-like logistics. And of course, part of the beauty and the complexity is the bike. You not just have to maintain the health of the individual, you have to maintain the bike. And obviously, you've got speed, you've got more potential opportunity for an accident. But in this sport, there's a lot of just beauty. It was also a sport that my generation, your generation can come together on, and you can age well on a bike and stay with it and grow with it. And there's a lot to learn, a lot of ways to, a bicycle is a lot more complicated than a pair of running shoes. And it's just part of the sophistication of the PMC that, there are multiple starts, multiple finish lines. You can ride 1 or 2 days. You can extend the weekend experience and customize it, as so many people do. And, so we've reached this point now. With this year, as you might know, we have a $70 million goal, and that will be given on November 12th. And I promise your listening audience we will meet or exceed it, which will bring us to $970 million or more. So in our 44th year, we will be crossing that $1 billion plateau, which, and we're calling that campaign 1 in a billion, referencing both that the event itself is literally 1 in a billion, and that you ought to be 1 in the $1 billion year participate. So we expect that's going to cause a lot of buzz. And 45 years. I mean, man, where did it go?
What has it meant to you to see how big the PMC has grown?
I think because when I get opportunities like this, you see the money, and the money is the iceberg above the surface. Below the surface is so many aspects to this. And I think my original idea, well, I couldn't say it was fully fleshed out. I was painting on a pretty big landscape of a 200-mile ride, and all the ways you could improve it, all the skills people could bring to it, all of the aspiration people would have if they took an identity of this PMC weekend, that that they could improve this product. And of course, all these efforts every year, regardless of whether you were driving a truck, hauling luggage, on a bike, pouring water, that you're part of this distilled product every year, and we've grown. The gift has grown 42 out of 44 years. So when you figure about economic recessions and COVID, I mean, that's just amazing, right? I mean, incredible. Anyone knows anything about business? I mean, who does that? I don't want to say we're too big to fail. That's not the point. But when you realize that you have amateur bikers riding bikes literally from central Massachusetts to eastern Massachusetts and all across Cape Cod in primetime summer weekend, it takes a lot to pull that off. That's where we are at this point, Ryan. Pretty cool. You got arguably over 700 teams. So you have team captains who are helping us with the communications. Actually, believe it or not, pretty organic. If you were to ride the PMC for the first time, amongst the thoughts you would have when it was over, when you're lying there in bed digesting what you were just a part of, one of them would be, I can do this smarter next year. There's a lot that, where you sleep, what was the gearing on your bike, what was your clothing, how did you eat before and during the weekend, how much alcohol did you consume? There are just so many ways to play this weekend. It's really an adult event, and you can grow. It's not like, it's also an event that I think that I understood that when I'm asking you to raise money, that, a retained asset is a lot easier than a new acquisition. So PMC at this point, we're 87% alumni. That guy or gal has been with us for over 8 years. They know the game. We've got great fundraising tools. We've got great training tools. But on a year-round basis, for the most part, while we do run many special events, our typical person, what they want most is the PMC weekend. And, that's 1 to 3 days in our ecosystem. And communicating and customizing, their luggage, their bike, their family, where we can host them, where we can't, all over the state. Most of these people work or run a business. They get all of the work because they also ride bikes to train for it. So, it's not every day that even your children say to you, I love you, you're wonderful. And on PMC weekend, there's a lot of love bombing reciprocity. The volunteer and the rider each saying to each other that the other is the best, as well as the people who line the street. So it's very validating. And again, it's been studied. This is not my quote, but it was said very well by a professor who studied this. And I think it was from Baypath College. And he said, if you want the PMC experience, you have to buy in. You can't do this on your own. So I could have said to you that in the 80s, and of course we were all younger, it was a beautiful, intimate event. But that intimacy, while still available in modest pockets, has been replaced by something bigger. And that is what we can achieve when we work together. And that's not lost on anybody, and particularly in this divided country and the issues that are going on in the world. The PMC is a tonic of goodwill. So, who wouldn't want to be a part of that? But, it would be hard to say to anybody that this was my vision in 1980. But I did see, as a non-medical person, as an athlete, as someone who had been touched by cancer, I personally was looking for an avenue to do something of some significance to join the battle against cancer. And, I suppose I could have said to you in 1980, I might have thought that cancer would be eradicated in my lifetime. I no longer believe that, but it might be in yours. But at the same time, both in my position and who I've grown to be as an adult, it doesn't change anything. It is our responsibility to take the ball forward. Cure rates started, when I started, childhood leukemias were 25% successful in mid-treatment, and now they're 80% successful. That's huge. If you lose a child or a loved one to cancer, it can't be soon enough. But you do have to respect the complexity of the issue and take the wins where you get them. So turning the crank of a bicycle as it relates to moving the ball forward, or a metaphor for funding cancer research and how hard they work. And, recognizing that there are while there are victories, there are tremendous losses as well. Yet they go to work the next day. And, that's inspiring. I don't have an oncologist skill. I've got different skills, but I found a role. And, it's been pretty great. Getting back to just the one other comment that I would have made about the sophisticated crowd. And, when they see the machinations of that we've thought ahead, we've anticipated their needs, one of the more common sentiments said to me on PMC weekend is, I wish my business ran like this. It's help. So, you've heard about it. If you ride it or volunteer in it, you understand it on another level. But PMC was also at the cutting edge of what's called peer-to-peer fundraising. And that's a friend asking a friend for money. This wasn't direct mail. When the PMC began, it was bingo and black tie. This a-thon industry didn't, and event programming, walks, were mostly awareness, and most hospitals didn't focus on that because they were looking for, wealthy donors. And probably the cost of such events just wasn't worth the offset for the revenue for they're getting $1 here, $5. Nobody, again, could have seen that, we started as a $5 and $10 gift, and now it's a $5,000 and $10,000 gift. The brand is strong. The technology is amazing. The hospital is a world-class hospital at Dana-Farber. And, it's a pride item here. We're at 80% of Massachusetts event. But Dana-Farber is known throughout the world. And with the kind of momentum and constituency that the PMC has, 44 years later, what's exciting is while some routes sell out, I've still got room for thousands more participants in our newer Sunday, one-day routes. So that's a mouthful. This is where we are, but I guess, Ryan, I could say to you after 44 years, we haven't hit our potential. If I could say to you now, I could say you wouldn't think I was crazy if I said to you, if I could fill every spot that I could accommodate, this could be $100 million weekend. That's possible. Will we get there? We'll see. But it's something to strive for.
And what does the $1 billion mark mean to you and to the PMC?
Well, as I might have alluded to earlier, in 1989, that was going to be the first year I knew we were going to give more than $1 million in a year. In my campaign that year, I named it B1 in a million. And in 1989, to raise $1 million, I said, now I'm a legitimate event. This isn't just do-gooder, or as one, how do I dare say it, which is no longer okay to say probably, but one television executive said, Bill, it's great what you do, but you're basically a GIMP of the week event. In other words, it's not a world-class ride. There's no champion. There's no winner. And, but now I can say, yeah, well, you know what? $1 million. That's a big deal. Well, what the $1 billion has done is allowed Dana-Farber, knowing that, we're rock solid, to count on us for this kind of funding every year. If you were like the Boston Foundation with $1.5 billion in assets, putting off your 5% interest to one charity every year, that would be us. We're the equivalent of that. So the kind of research they can underwrite, the next great idea, this is empowering the CEO, Laurie Glimcher, with a ton of unrestricted money that gives her the flexible dollars to follow her own vision. And that rare. But I would say to you, they're Dana-Farber, I think right now, it's something like there are like 1,100 clinical trials underway. Under one way or another, there's PMC money in all of them. It's amazing. How do you quantify that? And maybe most importantly, to be able to say that that which is proven at Dana-Farber and make its way into clinical care is exported to the world. So, we're part of that engine that gets these great ideas from the lab to the bedside. You have so many doctors. We get hundreds of doctors who ride in the PMC and are partially funding their own work through the PMC. They get to interact with the community in a sort of a soul-filling weekend. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, they're about, giving people manageable lives or giving them their lives back, period. Right. So, the PMC is hope. And, again, if you were a patient at Dana-Farber, I would suggest that the knowledge that so many people are behind you, that you're not alone in this, would be really life-affirming, which is not in any way say, but the nature of life is to fight for your life. I don't think anyone's a hero to fight for their life, but to give them the tools to have a higher percentage of, in fact, getting their life, and having the full ride of what life might give you is what anybody would hope for. So as I've often said, who wouldn't want to ride their bike 200 miles in the rain as opposed to undergoing chemotherapy? It's a no-brainer.
Absolutely. And when you did your first PMC back in 1980, how did you convince people or get people to ride with you?
Well, then I had a brochure. I had public service. I didn't spend a dime. And I still don't spend a dime on paid advertising. Now we have, an army of alumni riders and a, full-time publicity department and the like. And, but we grew very modestly. I mean, again, the first ride was 36 people. The second ride was 200, 5 years, and it was 500 people. So it grew very modestly. But it grew all the time. And people were always bringing more everything. And, that was very life-affirming. I mean, I worked out of my father's house for 17 years, and he died in 1998. And 1998, I think we're giving $6.5 million a year. That sounds small to you, but he actually lived long enough to see this event get institutionalized. Thousands of people were in. And, people of reputation, judges and politicians, celebrities, professional athletes were coming to ride the PMC. And, it was resonating on a level that many might not have imagined, given those humble early years. And, governors, secretaries of state, so senators. As I've said, given how much money it raises, it is the right blend of the right vehicle, the 100% pass-through, a world-class cancer center, a fabulous 3-day experience that can be repeated repeated and sustained through your whole life. So looking back, it all makes perfect sense. A lot of looking back.
When was the first year that you were like, this is real? Was it that $1 million year?
Well, there was something else attached to that. You're asking when was it real? I used to, my first flip, turning of a phrase, and I've turned a lot of them, was God loves a fundraiser, it never rains on us. I thought that was pretty cute because it hadn't rained on us. And as an event coordinator, I knew if it rained Saturday at noontime, I got you. What are you going to do? You're going to ride to the finish. But what would happen if it's pouring rain at 4 or 5 o'clock on the morning? Would you show? In 1989, that same $1 million year was that experience. It was a doomed forecast. Now, we didn't know what we didn't know. And I remember I see pictures of myself. I was wearing a backpacking full Gore-Tex outfit. As I went out to the starting line, I get up in the morning, I curse the fates, and I go out into the parking lot, and what do I see? Everybody's there. And I said, that's it. That's a major tipping point. What had happened? They had trained, they had fundraised, they had traveled to be there. They were promised this weekend experience, and God damn it, they were going to get it. And so I knew this wasn't just about, getting the next cappuccino, that there was a fidelity to the bond that had been created, that, they were committing to show up. So that answers your question on one level. It's a weird comment, but, this event always turned me on. It played to so many parts of my personality. It is my personality. And so I never got bored, whether I was working on T-shirt design, slogans, getting advertising, recruiting volunteers, town relations, publicity. It just, played to some part of who I was and was endlessly entertaining and something for me to strive for to make it better. And nothing was more affirming than when some other person walked in and said, I can help. And they did that. Yeah, it's like, and anyone who was that person, there are thousands of them, did what they did better than I did what they did. So I was offloading it, and they were improving the PMC experience. So, again, to be here 44 years later, sharing stories about, the good old days, it makes perfect sense to me. But it was very organic. This wasn't a corporate, venture capital. Here's $2 million. You get 2 years, figure it out, or we'll fold the business or something like that. This was, very modest. Out of my father's house, people were storing supplies in their house, and I can't tell you, unless you were to go on our website now and just look at the earliest videos, which are really revealing. How people dressed, how they rode, the hairstyles. I look at this, I go, my God, that's like, kids would look at this today. It's like 100 years ago. It's funny.
And what was your childhood like? Do you think that it had an impact on your decision to?
I had a very idyllic childhood. It was not traumatic. I was an athlete. I had an intact family. I went to a summer camp. It was pretty easy until my mother became ill. And I suppose I was a confident, probably a cocky kid. And, life was, I wasn't an exceptional student, but neither did I struggle. And I kind of figured my life was just going to work out. And when my mother became ill, it humbled me. I no longer felt that the world was my oyster, or that my life would be a layup. And, I struggled for my early, middle 20s. I don't think I understood I was struggling, but, while I dabbled in certain jobs, I was definitely not on a career track. And until I founded the PMC, none of it lit me up. But when I did put this together, and, literally by Sunday night of the PMC week, I said, I think there's something here. I think I can make this thing big. I can do good, and I can be true to myself, and I can, find expression in who I am. And it did. It worked out.
And how did you make a living at PMC in those earlier days?
I lived at home. I was I was told I was exciting, but I was not exactly what any woman was looking for as an ideal date. I lived at home on and off, probably 15 years. And my father, he had lost his brother, his wife, his business. He got diagnosed with Parkinson's. All of this happened in a 2.5 to 3 year period. It was devastating. And I think not only were we a close family to begin with, but when I said to him, Dad, and I wasn't living at home at the time, I said, do you mind if I set up my business in our dining room, which nobody used? He was thrilled to have me around because, when my mother was dying, we went to the hospital 3 times a day. That's what we did. And at the end of every day, 5 days a week, we'd go out to dinner. That's when I started drinking his drink at Jack Daniel's Manhattan. And after the second one, we'd find something to smile about. But it was tough. And then again, but I realized when I said, I'm going to do this, and I was in an apartment, I could see that it might be depressing to live and work in the same place. So I was in an apartment in Watertown at the time, and allowed me to drive 5 miles to my father's house. He always had a sandwich for me. And so we nourished each other, and truly over 17 years, the PMC breathed life into that house. He got to see it grow, and he made it so many people, because he was between the Parkinson's and probably depression. His world had shut down considerably. At a certain point with the Parkinson's, he had given up his license. That shrunk his world. But the PMC breathed an amazing amount of life into that household. And my father was a very sweet guy. My friends in the whole PMC world loved him. And that was nice. Hello, everybody. Hello. Hello. So, I wouldn't trade any of that for anything. And yet, I was a liberal arts kid. What I learned about business, I learned as I went along. Somewhere like 10 years in, I created an advisory board. And then I created a board of directors. And then in 1994 or 5, I empowered the board of directors. I gave up ownership of it to a board because I knew by then that I knew where this event was going, and that I shouldn't control all the financial vehicles, and that I needed certain guide rails on every aspect of running a business, which was growing, however modestly. And, yet if you looked at it on a graph, and a lot of it, again, as I referred to earlier, 1997, with the advent of the web, all of a sudden the PMC went like this, and then boom, you're growing by multi-million-dollar incrementals per year. So, again, it's an unusual story, but it's real.
And what were those years kind of before the PMC like for you, where you were kind of searching for what you wanted to do?
I was a journalist. I went back, I got a master's degree at Northeastern in education. I'd bounced back and forth to Colorado, where I went to school. I had done sales in the family business, but I didn't, but none of it was lighting me up. I wasn't committed to any of it. So, it really wasn't, I owned this. It was, I can just see getting out of bed every day and doing this, and I did. All right. You're friendly.
Hello.
Yeah.
What was your relationship with your mom like?
Very close. She was a very adoring mother. She had two boys. She was very affectionate. She was an only child. She was gorgeous. She was a model. And, but her life was disrupted as well. I mean, her mother was one of like 9, all went to U Vermont, all like summa cum laude. And my grandfather, was one of 3 brothers, all went to Harvard, but he lost all of his money. He was a stockbroker in the crash, a devastating blow given their lineage. So, I think my father, when he came back from World War II, he was fixed up by his best friend, she by hers. He definitely punched above his weight, my dad. But, he had a stable family business, and it worked out pretty well. So, and when she became ill, you got to remember, there's a world where I'm at the University of Denver. They chose, we're going to take a left in here, Ryan. Show how, when I walk my dog, that, they didn't tell me my mother was ill. She had some earlier tumors. She, eventually died of melanoma. And, I was able to enjoy my college experience. I'm very grateful, selfishly, that they didn't tell me. I would have felt guilty and the need to come home. But when I did come home, it was, how do I say it? It was, I sure had one foot out the door like I was going to go to Nepal. And, so you said your mother's dying. And I realized I could not do that. And, and the whole world was rocked. I just assumed I would bounce from one thing to another and would be, again, probably harder for your generation to hear with the amount of focus they have to have on like how you can make it in this world. To think that one could be as lackadaisical as to think, well, I got my college degree and I'm going to go around the world, but it'll all work out. And we kind of lived in a sweet spot where even that thought process was not that abnormal. But it did work out.
Good. Very much.